Today, I would like to start by letting you know for my last event here. My name is Hannah Glazen. I'm the current operations manager at Sir Gallery. And tonight we are very happy and excited to host this artist talk online with Sojin Chun and Yelaine Rodriguez for the exhibition Color of Woman. It's currently on view at Sir Gallery and will be on view until July 9th. But before we continue, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Sir Gallery is placed on is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity as immigrants to this land to work and present here. I also want to acknowledge government arts funding, all of which support our vision to a more diverse art scene in Toronto. So I would like to thank the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, and the City of Toronto through Section 37, as well as our community partner for this exhibition, Ready to Post, and Digital Now with Heritage that helps us create these online events. I will now pass it over to Tamara Toledo, who is the director curator of the gallery and of this specific exhibition today. Go ahead, Tamara.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you all for coming tonight and joining us. It is a beautiful day now in Toronto for those of you who are here. After a very gloomy day and rainy day. So thank you for joining us. So we have decided to continue to activate our virtual presence with these types of online events in order to reach a broader audience, and hope that those of you that can visit Sir Gallery will do so before the exhibition ends July 9th. So with that said, the exhibition Color of Women emphasizes the power that lies within color. As humans, we perceive color, but the same hue may convey different meanings and messages provided within different contexts, and they may possess various interpretations within different cultures. In Chile, where I'm from, there is a saying that states, ponele color, place color, which means to emphasize, to exaggerate, show the world your excitement. For this exhibition, I was driven by the fact that many of us in Canada are labeled people of color, a label that does not necessarily describe nor define us, but instead generalizes and pigeonholes the vast majority of racial backgrounds who do not fall into a certain white Eurocentric category. I was also compelled by the strength of women artists who use the potential of color to heal with freedom and bluntness within a Canadian landscape that tends to ignore sources of color, as well as people considered of color. Today, we have the pleasure of having two of those four artists presenting and exhibiting at the gallery with us tonight. They will not only discuss the work presented at Sir Gallery, but will also share other projects from their practice. And so I would like to first introduce Yelaine Rodriguez, who was born and raised in the Bronx. She is an Afro-Dominican based in the United States. She is an artist, an educator, a curator, and cultural organizer. Rodriguez received her BFA in fashion design from Parsons School of Design, the New School, and her MA in Latin American and Caribbean Studies and Museum Studies from New York University. Rodriguez conceptualizes wearable art, sculptures, and site-specific installations, drawing connections between Black cultures in the Caribbean and the United States, captured through photography and video documentation. So without further ado, please welcome Yelaine Rodriguez.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Tamara, for the lovely introduction and for inviting me to be in this panel today. and everyone for joining us as well. So I'm just gonna show some work from, I would like to start with, let me see, sharing my screen. Share slides. Can everybody see? Good.
Perfect.
All right, great. So I always like to start some of my presentation with this slide of flags that might be recognizable to some or new to others. And as Tamara mentioned, my family's from the Dominican Republic, but I was born and raised in New York. So I like to, when I was doing my research at one point, I can't remember when, I was looking at the original flag of the Dominican Republic, which is situated right here, which was inspired by the Haitian flag. This was the original Haitian flag that was inspired by the French flag. They stripped away the white, and so the blue and red together. Later on, it transformed into this flag, which inspired the original Dominican flag. And the French flag was inspired by the Dutch flag. And here, this one we see is the Puerto Rican flag, which was inspired by the Dominican flag that was inspired by the Haitian flag. So in my presentation, this will make a little bit more sense. We'll circle back to the slide. The work that I presented at Sur Gallery was based on this piece inspired by Oshun, the Orisha or fertility. And as Tamara mentioned, I went to Parsons for fashion design, but I didn't feel connected to the fashion industry, even though I worked in it for 5 years. I felt that I wanted to utilize my resource and my interest in wearable art, but to tell stories that were obscure in mainstream media. And that was, Afro-Dominican culture, Afro-Caribbean culture that I grew up with, but I never saw presented in TV. This is Oshun Orisha Fertility, Helpless Birth Generation of Revolutionary Women. This was the photograph that I presented at Sur. And here you see Oshun encompassing everything that I feel like is my genealogy, my DNA. It has inspired by indigenous roots in the Caribbean, with the mask inspired by the triangulito, which is the three-pointed sculpture that people will use during prayer. And then the crown is covered in cowrie shells, and the bust as well as covered in cowrie shells, which was a precious shell used in Africa, but also a shell that was used as currency to purchase bodies. And here she's wearing a cape, which I hand wove, incorporating browns and different textures of browns that are woven in a fashion that resembles scars, to talk about the scar that and process that enslaved people went across during the journey. And the indigo blue is also part that a color that you will see incorporated into my work a lot, which addresses the transatlantic slave trade and water that once was a form of connection, but later on during slavery and colonization period, it became a form of separating the Caribbean. And here, because I always like to talk about as well the location and how the location is strategically selected. Here we are in Russell Brook, New York, which has a waterfall that was sacred for the indigenous people of New York. I also work with video and performance. So here I just show you a small clip. So what you're seeing in this video is a performance that I did in Southern Barrio last year for the Bienal. And I started getting into performance and incorporating music and these digital phones, which you see here constructed out of CRT TVs. It kind of brings back my childhood growing up in the 90s with these big boxes that I wanted to see myself projected in there. And now I bring them into my practice as a form of creating these digital thrones and projecting my video. So in these TVs, this video that you see here on the screen that I documented in Russellburg when I was doing the photo is being projected in these TVs. And it becomes part of like this altar for Oshun, which is activated by the dancers who are dressed in these blue bodysuits that represent the children of the water, and bringing in the traditional music of Palo and in the piece, because it's a full experience that I feel cannot be justified just in a photo. It needs to be expressed not only in the photo, but in video and performance and live music, etc. Here I'm showing Madame Bridget, who is the Loa of the dead. And what she is a Haitian Loa, which is Loa means spirits in Haitian Voodoo. Here she is located in a ruins colonial house in Cuba. I chose this site because of Haiti's relationship to Cuba after the revolution. Cuba became the second main production of sugar. And a lot of people in Haiti that were colonizers and were able to escape the revolution brought the plantations format to Cuba. And to this day in Baracoa, Cuba, there is a community of Cubans of Haitian descent that still hold on to Haitian Creole and Haitian Voodoo in their practice. So even though Madame Bridget is the Orisha or Loa of the dead and cemetery, and she's the keeper of spirits, that she helps transition them from life to death. I chose this like colonial house that was abandoned, but still you see remnants of like the ceramic tiles of the floor and the walls. There's also I remember there was stained glass like over here on the door. The whole ceiling was completely stripped when you see nature taking over it. So it was this place that reminded me of like beauty and decay and nature taking over. And I saw Madame Bridget just like walking through the space and guiding people out of this man-made or artificial structure. This one here is Ezili Dantour, who is associated with the Black Madonna of Chobaska, which I like to say in Chobaska because I feel that the Black Madonna in Chobaska does not only pertain to Poland. It is an image that is connected to Africa, that traveled from Africa to Poland to Haiti during the revolution via Polish soldiers. And because we don't have like images of these orishas per se, and because of slavery and that the enslaved Africans had to mask their religion with Catholic imagery, I use a lot of Catholic imagery in my work, like in the posts here, the way that Ezili and Anais are holding their hands. is referencing the Black Madonna in that portrait. But then I put in symbols of Haiti in the crown, with the hibiscus flower being the national flower of Haiti, and then the open heart veve here. Veves are symbols that are connected to Isharishas. And here you see Azili Zeve. And the face here represents the priestess that Cecile Fatima, that was the body that Azili mounted during the ceremony. So there's a lot of like images that, even though you see it as a whole, sometimes you can see Catholic imagery by the poses. You also have like symbols that connect back to that narrative. Here we have Shango, who is represented in the Catholic world as Santa Barbara. And I wanted to play a bit with gender here, and her Shango being masculine Orisha, but in the Catholic world, Shango is represented as a woman. And here I shot her at Preserved Native American Trail in the Bronx, because of thinking about aloofness and how the land that I inhabit now in the Bronx is not original to me. So I always have to think about who this land belonged to before, or who had ownership of this land before I arrived. Here, this is a project that I did in Loíza, Puerto Rico. This is a cave called Maria de la Cueva de la Cruz, which once housed indigenous people of Puerto Rico, and later runaway enslaved Africans found refuge. This cave, I found it particularly interesting after I was reading an article based on Loíza, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood in Puerto Rico. The article talked about how, due to the structure of Loíza, how it only has one row, it was preserved in its like natural state. If you see documentation of it in the 40s, it feels like if you're there in the present. But also because of the structure, Loíza was, and because Loíza is predominantly a Black neighborhood in Puerto Rico, it was kind of like excluded from development, right? So you don't see large chain stores like McDonald's in here, or Walgreens, etc. And there is a beauty to it, but there's also a part that you can tell that it was disenfranchised by the government. So I went here to represent Obatala, which is synchronized with Jesus, because in the article is the interview this young man who said, if God was Black and from Loíza, maybe people will care about this area. So I titled this piece, If God Was Black and from Loíza. And here Obatala is kind of like in this cave as a guardian, and he's holding a cane made out of higueras, which was these fruit skins that indigenous people use as bowls for eating. And the stake here is from a fallen wood branch that I picked up in that area. So a lot of natural materials representing the indigenous part of this cave. And then the machete is made out of cooked sugar, cotton, and cowrie shells, to talk about the African connection to this cave and how these materials were used as a source of currency and exploitation against Black people. This project that I'm going to show now is what you're seeing right now is Ingenio Boca de Nigua, which is an old sugarcane plantation in the Dominican Republic. It was one of the first sites of rebellion in 1521, which was led by a woman named Ana Maria. And I chose this site to represent this opera, which is inspired by is a Cuban opera from 1998, inspired by Santeria, but I chose to represent it in my country, in the Dominican Republic, because I found a connection with the protagonist of this opera with Ana Maria. So here is the story basically is Queen Apeteri, who has this magical pet bird, and her Orisha, which is Orula, tells her that she needs to give up the bird in order to protect her kingdom, but she doesn't. And for me, the bird represents freedom. For like she feels free and loved by this bird. And for me, Ana Maria and her, she couldn't give up on freedom, and she fought so hard, and she still lost her life. And that's what happens to this queen at the end of the play. She wasn't able to give up the bird, and they both were sacrificed. So here's some shots from the film. This is the sugarcane plantation. This is the castle of Palacio Palave, which is where the owners of these plantations lived. And I like to combine the architecture, these ruins, these sites of historical significance, nature sites as well, to activate them in my work with these stories of Afro-Spirituality, to bring it to like a contemporary audience, and to not let these spaces die over time. This one is a project that I did this year in the new year. This is the Royal Shipyard's doors in the Dominican Republic, which is for me like point B of the door of no return in Ghana. And I took a tour with this art historian named Ruth Pion, and she's a really interesting historian in the Dominican Republic who's giving these tours about the slave routes in the island, and bringing visibility to these spaces that we go through every day, but people just ignore, or there's no plaque commemorating these sites. So people walk through this door all the time without realizing that this door used to, this was like the first point for that enslaved Africans after the long journey across the Atlantic went through. So when I went through here and I walked through the door, I felt like this like energy, and I was thinking about how people after the journey and being in new land, and this is the first structure that they see, and immediately behind this door is the staircase that they were led to. They had to go up these stairs, and which will lead them. There's a pathway in between here. So once they will go up these stairs, they will be on top here. And it was a narrow pathway that will lead them to the warehouse where they were retained. So just how connected these and strategic this architecture and this urban planning was to control Black bodies. And that immediately as they landed, they didn't have like, it was just like, all right, here, this is the routine. You go up these stairs, you go to the warehouse, you're retained there, you're shut up, and then you're sold in the market, in the church. And then I don't do a lot of studio work, but I do have a series called Afro Sagrada Familia, which I photograph Black Dominican creatives that use their platform to highlight and centered Afro roots in the Caribbean, in the island. So here we have Kaila Mbule, who is a poet, and she's the one that was singing in the Oshun performance. And then we have Said, who is a musician in this band called La Grama One, which centers Afro music in the island. We have here Sasso, who is an Afrobeat and rapper and singer in the Bronx, and Jaisa Jimenez, who is a poet, and she's the one represented in The Door of No Return, the point B of The Door of No Return. Giordano, who is a bass player in La Grama One, and he's I always wanted to photograph him because he is the nephew of Fernandito Villalona, who was a great musician in the 80s that my mom loved when she was growing up. And they have very similar face structure, but also the history of like these musicians and Fernandito wearing his afro in the 80s, and now Giordano wearing his locks. It was like really cool to see like the generations and the connection. And then the last project that I wanted to show is this piece here called Mioso, Colonial Tropes in the 21st Century. This is I usually work with architectural ruins and with natural landscapes, but this project is a new project that was built here, I think in 2020 in the Netherlands, in the Belmer, which is a Black-centered neighborhood, mostly Surinamese, Afro-Surinamese community. And this house, or this housing complex, was created by a white Dutch architect who thought that it was appropriate to place colonial architecture in this neighborhood. And colonial architecture that is called Mioso, which means my house in Suriname, but in order to, these are very like high rented spaces, expensive places to live in a neighborhood that people might not be able to afford to live in these spaces. So it's just a facade, it's a fake gesture for me. And I created this garment inspired by the traditional wear that Afro-Surinamese women will use. The agnisa, that's the hat that she's wearing, and the koto is the dress. And then the flag here, this is inspired by the flag called Keto Koti, which means breaking of chains, which symbolizes the freedom, or the abolition, the freedom of abolitionists of the day of 1863, but they had to work 10 more years. So a lot of Afro-Surinamese today wear a pin that says 1873 to talk about how that added 10 years. And this is the studio portrait that I did for that piece, inspired by Wilhelmina, who, this is this portrait that you see on the side is based on colonial portraits that they would take of women in their attire during the colonial period. But I wanted to pull from this history and bring kind of like a different perspective to it, with the clothing celebrating these women and giving her agency in her narrative. And that's it. So you can see how these flags are represented in my work, and we're going all the way to the back, to the front. So that's the end of my presentation. You can see how all these flags are represented in my practice, and how these history are interwoven to each other, and they overlap, and what happens in one place ripples in the next place and inspire another culture and another narrative. And I'm really interested in Afro-spirituality, Afro traditions, not only as it is represented in the Dominican Republic, but how it's represented in other parts of the Caribbean and in the States and throughout the diaspora, because for me, that is the connection and the inheritance that Afro diasporic people have. And that's my presentation, so thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, considering also that it's quite late where you are now. So I'm very impressed. Thank you so much for that, Yelaine. And keep in mind that you will have some time for questions for her, for both artists, once Sojin is done with her presentation. So just think of that, and you can either type in your question in the chat or just raise your hand and voice it out. So next we have Sojin Chun, who is a Toronto-based artist. She is a curator and educator that explores the alternative dialogues that emerge in between cultures and disciplines. Chun has participated in numerous international film festivals, such as the Aberhassen International Film in Germany, Video Formes in France, and Cine Toro in Colombia. She has exhibited internationally in DIY art spaces, galleries, and museums. Sojin's video works are represented by GIV in Montreal, CFMDC in Toronto, and B-Tape in Toronto. Chun has a BA in Applied Arts from Ryerson University and a Master's in Communications and Culture from Ryerson York Universities. So thank you so much for joining us, Sojin, and the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Tamara, for the introduction. Thank you, Yelaine, for that lovely presentation. I have a little bit of an allergy situation happening here, so I'm going to sound a little bit nasally, but please bear with me. So let me just share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen? Maybe I feel like I'm in one of my classes. Give me a thumbs up. Can you see this? Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Hannah. So thank you again. Thank you. I also wanted to thank Hannah, who has been instrumental in putting together this exhibition and really helping me throughout the process. So I really appreciate it. So what I'm going to talk to you about is mainly about the project that I'm showing at the Sur Gallery, titled Quesada, which means in English to turn the color turquoise. So I've also coined this term, this particular color that you can see on your screen as turquoise, because it's this kind of ambiguous green color. Some people call it turquoise, some people call it teal. So I decided to coin that specific color turquoise. But the actual paint that I used to paint a lot of the objects in this project is actually called Nice. And I thought that that was a fitting name for the color as I chose it, because I really like the color. And also for whatever reason, it reminds me of my grandmother. So the project at Quesada has different components. So there is a 2-channel video installation that's been shot on Super 8, which is on view at Sur Gallery. And it also includes video documentations of different performances where I sell, barter, or exchange different collections of these turquoise objects in different parts of the world. And I'll be talking to you about that some more. And the project also has some photographs of the painted objects. And some of the collections that I'm going to be showing you today include a toy weapons collection, plastic fruits and vegetables, quesada tamales, so tamales that have been made in the color, as well as some souvenir from Rio de Janeiro. So I wanted to show you this photograph of Seoul, Korea. So I was born in Seoul, and I left at the age of 8. But these kinds of very lively street life was very familiar to me growing up in Korea. So I just wanted to throw this out there that the population of Seoul is now currently almost 10 million people, and the size of Seoul as a city is about 605 square kilometers. And the population of Toronto is 6.3 million people, and the size of Toronto is just over 7,000 square kilometers. So you can imagine the kind of busy street life in which I grew up in. Definitely so at the time in the 80s, it was an urban jungle, and it continues to be. And so I grew up being very accustomed to this kind of buzzing street activity, and that was really familiar to me. So this is just a photograph that I wanted to share with you. These are called pojangmacha, and they're essentially food tents where you can get really cheap, really good food. A lot of people go there after work and have enjoy some delicious street food and some soju, the Korean vodka, you could call it. So so I think that this growing up in a big city when I was a little girl, and experiencing all this street life, street informal economies really influenced the way that I see the world in some ways, and some of my art practice. So when I was 8 years old on my birthday, my family immigrated to Bolivia, and I wanted to represent South America in this upside down version, just to get us to rethink the power dynamics that exist between the North and the South, especially within the Americas. So the South is often seen as really poor, and often we see a lot of poverty porn that comes from that area. But what I experienced living in Bolivia is that is really actually full of natural resources, as well as they have so many different indigenous people that live on the land. So Bolivia is a little bit different maybe from other parts of South America, where the majority of the population still remain to be indigenous. So the photograph that you see on the right is one of the few photographs that I have from childhood that was taken probably within the month that I moved to Bolivia. And on the left, you can see me holding my first little puppy. I was quite smiley and quite happy. But that's a very significant photograph. And I think that I am an artist today because of my experiences living in the diaspora, in the Korean diaspora in Bolivia, as well as here in Canada. So I just wanted to share that with you. So in 2008, I had an opportunity to do a residency at Galeria Kiosco. And so I went back to Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia, 17 years after I left to do some memory work as coined by theorist Annette Kuhn. So I was interested in formulating a new idea of this, of my childhood paradise. And the photograph that you see here is of the former bus terminal. And my parents operated a very humble wholesale candy store. So on the other side of the bus terminal. So a lot of the street vendors would purchase their candy from my parents' store and package them in little plastic bags so that they could sell it to the different people passing through this bus terminal. So I think that this is very important in the work that I did with Active Quesada, as I wanted to think about an artistic practice in some ways an informal economy, though since then I've kind of changed my mind about what it means to be an artist, since being an artist also means that we are extremely privileged. So on my way to school from my place, from my house in Bolivia to the bus terminal, so basically my parents' store was in between our house and my middle school. So I had to actually go through this market, Mercado Ramada, every day, just walking back and forth. And so these kinds of scenes were very familiar to me. And so that was something that I wanted to explore through Active Quesada. And in 2008, when I went to the residency, I went with a few friends to this other market called Mercado Kumuvi, which is a market that sold used clothing. And basically at the time, Evo Morales was in power. And so he wanted to make the selling of secondhand goods illegal, because all of these goods were coming from the States, and it was really affecting the local textile and the fashion industry in Bolivia, and in particular in Santa Cruz de la Sierra. So the day when I arrived to the market, it's insane how cheap some of these goods were, and you could really see how that actually affected some of the local people that were making these clothing. And so as we were leaving the market, there was a protest, and the police came and they threw some tear gas. And I thought, how ironic that even though what Evo Morales was trying to do to sustain the local economy by banning some of these American goods, a lot of the people that worked in the market and a lot of the people that humble people, working class people that were trying to sell these goods to make ends meet, they were kind of clashing with the government's agenda to sustain local businesses or local industries. So I thought, how ironic that globalization is really affecting the people on the ground, the people that really have no control over these policies or the way that global politics works. So I found that to be a very significant moment when I was there. So at the time I was looking at different art practices that were taking art into sort of a different realm, or combining art practices that were thinking about what it means, what art is, and I started to think about the process of evaluating art. So I really like this project by Martha Rosler called the Mega Monumental Garage Sale, which was first staged in San Diego at the museum there in 1973. So what she did is she staged a garage sale inside the museum. And so she promoted this event as a garage sale in the local newspaper. And she also, and then it was also promoted as an exhibition in the art circuits. So I thought that was interesting. Her project was sort of still staging an informal economic practice, mainly practiced by middle-class people in the U.S., maybe also here in Canada, within the art context. But it was sort of in contrast to this other project that I found really interesting by the Colectivo Cambalache from Bogota, Colombia, where they would stage this street museum titled Museo de la Calle. So they would have extensive conversations with people on the streets that were recycling goods and selling them on the streets and making a living like that. So they would have conversations with them and actually curate these series of objects on the streets and present them as a museum. So my original idea for a Turquesada actually came from, I wanted to continue a series of performances that I did. This is a video still from a project that I did in Taiwan. I was at a residency called the Treasure Hill Artist Village in Taipei. And so in this project, I wanted to camouflage my body within the grounds of the residency. So given some of the history of war that Taiwan experienced, this particular area was inhabited by a lot of people that stayed after the war and could not go back to China. So I was thinking about camouflage as a strategy for survival, and also kind of doing these actions that were somehow absurd and kind of quirky around the grounds of the residency. Also because when I was in Taiwan, people often thought that I was Taiwanese or Chinese, and when I said no, I'm not, I'm Korean, they would be shocked in a way, and they would often say, "Oh, no offense, but Koreans tend to be more conservative, and you're not so conservative." And then I would say, "Well, thank you. That's a compliment." So I wanted to stage this type of performances in Toronto, but it took sort of a different turn because at the time I was looking at informal economies and also looking at artists taking their artwork in different contexts. And so I wanted to bring that into my work as well. So this is one of the first performances that I did here in Toronto in St. Jamestown, which is sort of an inner city neighborhood very close to where I am now. So when I started staging these kinds of performances, at first I just would plot myself with some donated objects so that I can participate sort of in a garage sale with other people doing that. And then I realized that I needed to bring something else into the project because to make it more visible, so that it would be obviously more like an artistic project. So that's when I had the idea to paint objects in the color teal, and I thought at that point that rather than camouflaging myself among the people, what I wanted to do was camouflage myself among the objects that I was selling. So I was also trying to comment on the role of the artist and how we also become sort of like a brand in some ways. So I staged this project, as I mentioned, in different places like Kensington Market here in Toronto. I'm going to show you in a bit. I did it in Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro. I did another version in Mexico City, and I did another one in Santiago, Chile. So the idea was that whatever I was selling on that street or on the streets had to be specific to that context. So in St. Jamestown, I found sort of an outdoor fruit and vegetable seller. So I asked him if I could just, stand next to him with my plastic teal poise fruits and vegetables. And he was sort of like, yeah, sure, why not? So the next few slides just shows an installation that I did for Alucine Film and Media Festival, which is the Latino film festival here in Toronto. So it included some of the video documentation of the performances, as well as the actual objects that I was often trying to sell or exchange or barter. So I also had another collection of recycled objects that I would find and paint as well. And then this is just an example of some of the fruits and vegetables that I painted in that color. This slide is from a performance that I did in Kensington Market, where I was, so I decided to bring these teal poise guns and weapons, toy weapons, and there were some knives and things like that. And the reason why I chose to do this in Kensington Market was that it's not exactly legal here to try to sell stuff on the streets without a permit. So I knew that going to Kensington Market, just because it's an area full of artists and sort of alternative, where you can see a lot of people who are sort of alternative, that I wouldn't really have an issue. So that was also one of the earliest performances that I did. This is a photograph of a broken, I titled it Broken Jesus, of the very typical iconic Christ statue in Rio de Janeiro. So when I was there, I wanted to paint these different souvenirs in the same color and kind of approach people on the beach to try and sell them. So what I found interesting was that people, so I was a gringador, obviously, because I'm not Brazilian, and I was just there for a year, living there for a year, doing a residency at Capacete. And so the people, the other gringos on the beach would completely ignore me because they were being constantly bombarded by all the street vendors selling all kinds of stuff, souvenirs, food, drinks. And so I found it really great that the only people that actually talked to me were the street vendors, because they were a bit confused about who I was and what I was doing. And in the video that's at Sur Gallery, there's a man that's selling hats to tourists, and him and I exchanged some of my objects with a hat. And so a lot of this project, more than the color, is really about connecting with the local people and just trying to understand what's going on sort of on the streets. Another performance that I did was at Electric Eclectic Festival. So they invited me to stage this installation there. And that was the time that I actually was able to barter or sell most of the objects. So I have very little of those objects left in my person. The latest performance that I did in this photo, where I look very angry, is it was at the El Zócalo in Mexico City. So I collaborated with a local caterer who actually made these turquoise, teal-coise tamales that were sweet. So the idea was that that the people, I would ask people where they were from. So local people would get a free tamal. But if they were foreigners or if they were part of participating in this conference that I was also participating in, that I would, depending on where they came from, whether they were from Europe or the US, that they would have to pay a fee for the tamales because they earn more money in their local countries. This project also took a different manifestation where I was kind of molding this little figurine in the same color and making soaps and so I was trying to sell some of these objects at the time, which I wasn't really successful at. So I think that I just wanted to show you just a couple of slides from the actual exhibition. So this is the 2-channel video installation that I spoke about, called also a turquesada, fittingly, that was shot on Super 8. And the exhibition also includes a series of photographs that I have never shown before. These were actually printed in Korea and I shipped them here. And yeah, so I think that concludes my presentation, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of the project. So I started the project in 2013, and every time I say this is the last time I'm going to do this performance, but luckily I get invited to do the same performance in different places. And I guess that the main thing about the performances is that I often try not to do it for an art audience, so that I just kind of pop up somewhere on the streets where there's a lot of street activity and informal economies, and I just try to do this action to unassuming bystanders, just to kind of have conversations about what they think art is, and the negotiation that I have with the audience members is what I find the most interesting, because we have some great conversations and they question what I'm doing, and then sometimes they'll ask, how much is it? And then I'll say, how much do you think it is? How much do you think it's worth? I think I sold one thing for $2 one time to a little 9-year-old girl, which was very exciting for me. So yeah, so that concludes my presentation, and thank you for being here today, everybody. And it's nice to see that some familiar faces have shown up. So thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Sojin. That was incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you both of you for those wonderful presentations. Great presentation, dice Carolina Testa. So now is the time for the audience, to ask your questions. It's an incredible opportunity that we have both of these amazing artists join us. And I was just thinking about that piece, Sojin, that you mentioned, that camouflage is a strategy for survival, and how that contraposes with Yelaine's proposal and narrative and counter narrative of presence and representation within public space. So it was a nice pairing there.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's also interesting because I always grew up in places where I was often like the first Asian family to move into a neighborhood or something. So we always kind of stood out like a sore thumb. So I think that that's where kind of my idea of camouflage comes from, that the less they saw me, the better it was for me, because then that would mean that they would that I wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb, but which was virtually kind of impossible, right? but
no, I think it makes complete sense. I think we all kind of go through that as immigrants, as part of a diaspora, where we don't necessarily want to be seen and just be part of a broader community. Are there any questions from the audience Just a great presentation. Anyone?
Feel free to unmute yourself as well if you prefer to voice your question instead of writing it in the chat.
I have a question for Yelaine. So I was thank you, Yelaine. I really appreciated your presentation. And when you were talking about looking at different Afro-Spirituality in the Caribbean, I was you mentioned something about you were saying how the Catholics were interpreting like some of the orishas. So I was just curious and interested to know if there are like what the synchronicity would be between like some of these Afro, maybe in the Dominican Republic, because I know that like in Brazil, for example, they say like a lot of these orishas have, you know, some elements that were derived from Catholicism. So I was just curious to hear your perspective on that and what you found out while you're, what you know about that kind of synchronicity.
Hi, Sojin. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your lovely presentation as well. It was really nice to hear about your practice. It was not that there is a Christian representation, but that enslaved Africans used Christianity to cover or to mask their practice, because it was punishable by law if they were caught practicing. So a lot of these ceremonies were done in secrecy. And as a result, we have a lot of, you know, syncretism within the religion. It's not as it was practiced back in Africa, in Yoruba traditions. So for example, with Shango is represented with Saint Barbara. And what I find interesting is in the Dominican Republic, Shango is represented or synchronized with Saint Barbara, and that also happened in Cuba. So you see these connections, how they're separated by water, they're separated by colonizers, etc. But somehow these things still happen. And so Obatala synchronized with Jesus, and they just found like similarities between who they were forced to praise with the spiritual and with the spirituality or spirits that they wanted to pray, and just put them together to make it easy. Like, Obatala is supposed to be the Risha of the sky, so Jesus comes to mind. Shango is the Risha of thunder and lightning and a warrior. Santa Barbara is also a warrior, so they put them together. So like that.
Thank you.
I have a question for Yelaine. I mean, we've had this conversation before, but just if you could share how you you come up with these incredible projects and so elaborate projects where you combine the fashion design, the garment design with the spirituality, with you know, narratives that are significant to diaspora. You're situated within a diaspora in the United States that is very particular. How you manage to combine like so many different aspects and reach that contemporary audience. I'm just wondering whether you're, when you speak to your audiences, are they capturing all those different elements that you're trying to convey?
That's a good question. Because I do feel that there's a lot of symbolism that I know because I'm so invested in the process and I'm creating a new visual language for these orishas, based on my experience and also in my background in my education, which is very Euro and US centered when it comes to fashion. So there is like the garments that they wear for the celebration and for these ceremonies that I could pull from if I wanted to, but I create the designs based on what I like and like how I feel, and like I do select the colors based on the orishas. So I sometimes feel sometimes it bothers me thinking about that, like if people are capturing all the symbols, that it's not just a pretty picture or a pretty fashion picture. And that's why I started getting into writing. So I don't know if people will read the articles and stuff, but those who do want to know more about it, that there is writing involved within it as well. But I had in the beginning, and still do, like, battle with that idea of like working with fashion as my form of painting, that because we have these connections to fashion that is not art for some people. Like, it's just what we like is a wearable, it's not considered, or it's not seen as fine art. And how can I push that narrative so people can see it as fine art? And also, I feel like there's a double-edged sword. Like, people are captured by the beauty of the photograph, and then once they start reading the text, they would understand more. Yeah, I'm really involved with the description of the wall text too, because I don't want it to be misrepresented. And I think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is so, it's key to understanding the work, right? So there is also a question from Luis for Yelaine, now that you are thinking about your work and you can maybe respond. How did you find out about the colonial development in the Netherlands? And did the project start because of that development?
Did what project start? The Mioso project start, or my whole career?
I don't know.
That particular project started because of that development, but my practice as a whole started back in 2015 when I graduated from the university, and I wanted to connect more to my roots. And I figured that while I was doing my research, that I couldn't talk only about the Dominican Republic. I had to talk about Haiti. I had to talk about Cuba and how all these, revolutions happen. But that project in the Netherlands, my partner, he's an urban planner and an architect, and he is really critical about these spaces. And we were having a conversation about it. And during the conversation, it just, like, spark this idea to create this piece based on that conversation.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't want to jump in if anybody else is wanting to ask questions. I know there's always like a silent, awkward moment in Zoom. Sojin from Margie. Sojin, will you continue this project with Aturquesada?
Yeah, I think so. I think somehow I will always continue to do the Aturquesada project. I've been actually there. I was trying to, with my partner, we were trying to build this more interactive Aturquesada pieces that kind of got left behind since 2018. So yeah, so we've been thinking about how to have like an interactive element to it, and maybe I can cast maybe some of those astronauts in a larger way. So yeah, something is kind of brewing, but in terms of timeline, I'm not really sure. So I think that I will continue to do maybe different types of performances in different contexts. Thanks, Margie.
I'm wondering, Sojin, if you could tell us a little bit more about how audiences, again, this is a question about audience, respond to this particular piece when you go into public spaces, depending on what country you perform it in, because you have exposed it in different countries. And you talked a little bit about your experience in Brazil, a little bit in Mexico. If you could just tell us some anecdotes or just share those experiences.
When I was in Mexico, actually, it became very chaotic because they figured out that I was giving the tamales away to the local people. So all of a sudden, I became swarmed by people. They were like, and then I, like a good Canadian person, I had to tell them to get in line because it was the amount of people coming at me, you know, asking for one for a tamal. It became like a little bit overwhelming. So that was a very specific experience, I guess you could say. When I've done it here in Toronto, what I do find is that because I seem so odd in a way or so quirky, the people that approach me here. Also, one thing that I forgot to mention is that in South America, you know, informal economies are everywhere. You know, it's like there's street vendors everywhere. You know, and that's the way that working class people survive. But you know, in Toronto, there's so much red tape, and in order to do anything on the streets, you need like a permit and this and that. So whenever I have found pockets where people are sort of casually doing it, are in certain neighborhoods, and the population tends to be more immigrant. There are more immigrant populations, and so the people that approach me also seems to be sort of in a way like they see me as one of them because I just seem so odd. Like, what is this crazy person doing? Like, why is she dressed like that? And why is she selling, you know, plastic and vegetables, right? So I find that I do connect with people that, you know, normally I wouldn't connect with on the daily basis. And so they're just curious. I find that they just come up to me and start talking to me. And I that's what I actually really enjoy about the project, that, you know, when they ask me, I just say, oh, it's an art project. And then sometimes they just take it for what it is, and they go, oh, wow, great, that's art, great job. Or so, yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think here is very different than doing it in South America, where they're more used to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that also reminds me of something that you mentioned during your presentation, where you talked about when you started this, you had a different view about the project, and then you slowly understood that there was privilege as an artist in doing this performance. And so can you expand on that concept and idea?
Yeah, I think that definitely, you know, as artists, we don't really make a lot of money, or anyways, the artists that I know and myself, we don't survive off of our art. So it is definitely sort of not a formal economic activity to be an artist. But definitely, you know, I've had, as you saw, like I've had so much opportunity to travel the world, you know, even if I'm not making a lot of money off of it. In fact, I'm probably, you know, spending more than what I would receive from doing some of those projects. But definitely being an artist is definitely a position of privilege because of all the access that we have to travel. For example, when I did my residency in Bolivia in 2008, before I went there, I read that the average Bolivian makes $50 a year, $50 US a year. And the residency that was receiving me, they were giving me $500 for 2 months. So I thought, wow, how ironic, right? Here I am going to be an artist, and I'm making essentially in 2 months, how I guess, not a math major. So, the average Bolivian is making so much less in a year than me going there and doing a project for 2 months. So I think that that's sort of where, so I understood that, when I talk about informal economies on the streets, it has a very different meaning for artists than for people that actually need to sell candy on the streets or hats on the streets or whatever. So I think that I'm very aware of that in many ways, but I'm also trying to, I don't know, I also see myself sort of in those settings only because I guess growing up in Latin America and Korea, those are very familiar scenes for me. I feel very comfortable in them, and I sort of wanted to connect back to some of those settings. Mhm.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I think we will wrap it up with this last question from Francesca, who says, Yelaine, your settings for photographs are all over the world. Do you know about these sites before creating the fashion? Or how does your process look like in relation to place?
Hi, Francesca. Thank you for your question. My work is very like one influences the other. So I know most of the time I do know where I'm going to shoot beforehand, and I do the research at the same time that I'm creating the wearables. Sometimes the site inspires the wearable, and sometimes the wearables inspire the site. So for the Mal de Ojo piece, the door of no return, I created the piece as for protection. And I knew that I wanted to photograph it in the Dominican Republic, but I had no idea where. And in fact, like we went all over the island, just like traveling and checking out spaces, just, exploring until I finally settled on that door. And for example, the one in the Netherlands, I found out about the location first, and then that triggered the whole project. But I tried to work simultaneously with my research and the designs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your artistic practices, your thought processes, and your experiences with audiences. And I think we are ready to wrap it up. Thank you all for coming. And I think Hannah should take the rein now and wrap it up for me. She's a pro at it. So, but I do want to say this is Hannah's last event with us. It's been a huge pleasure to have her as part of our team, and I wish her all the best in her master's in Europe venture. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you, most importantly, to Sojin and Yelaine for making the time. I know we all have busy schedules these days now that things are opening up, so it's still nice to have this opportunity to sit and listen to you both talk about your work. This officially wraps up also our virtual programming for the exhibition Color of Women. We do have the recordings available online for our curator tour, as well as we have the gallery now live virtually on our website. So if you are not able to make it in for some reason before the end of the exhibition, which once again closes on July 9th, you can check out the exhibition virtually. If you are planning on coming by, we're open on Thursdays and Fridays from noon to 6 p.m. and Saturdays from 11 to 5 p.m. And we'll be here. Other than that, to keep in touch with us for future programming and any events that and our future exhibitions, please stay in touch, register for our newsletter. You can email me and I can add you to the list, or you can find a link to register on our website, as well as follow us on our social media handles at Star Gallery on most platforms and at Le Cap Arts on our Twitter. Thank you so very much, everyone, for coming out. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.